Thank you, Brad, and welcome everyone. It's good to see all of you here today for the EI Fall Forum. I think this is our third year now of having a Fall Forum. It's become a little bit routine, so that's a good thing. I'm going to be talking about pavement management programs and how pavement management programs can be the centerpiece of your strategy for stretching your infrastructure dollars. We're going to start with just a general discussion about why pavement management programs are important. And then we'll get into some of the technical aspects of pavement condition. We'll also talk about pavement maintenance, the importance of pavement maintenance and the role in extending the life cycle of your pavement. And then we'll add costs to that. And we'll look at how we can optimize our roadway programs using pavement management. So why is pavement management programs important? Well, first of all, we're looking at one of the highest valued assets that a community has when we're looking at the pavement. And we're going to be talking today mostly about asphalt, but same concepts apply to concrete. So these assets also, we know that in maintaining these assets, we have to be active. We don't just put down an asphalt pavement and then go away from it for 20 years. There is maintenance that needs to be done. And so with these two things in mind, we're looking at trying to optimize our limited resources, right? So how can we extend the life cycle of our pavement by being proactive in our maintenance and being judicial in our economy that we are spending, the dollars that we're spending. The other thing that's nice about pavement management programs is that they provide an objective result. Many communities in our region are using this on an annual basis to support their roadway programs. And in fact, the boards and councils have become routinely aware of them, and they know that this is part of the routine, the annual routine. So they expect to see the pavement management program as part of the rationale for this year's annual program. So the idea that we're going to be pursuing here is that pavement management programs can produce optimum funding. And on this slide, you see the green curve represents the deterioration in condition over time or as a pavement gets older. And if we allow that deterioration to go down to a particular level where the road is in very poor condition, and then we resurface it, we would have a curve, a deterioration curve like you see there. The idea is that preventative maintenance can be done incrementally to extend the life expectancy at much lower life cycle costs, okay? And that's shown with the white curve there. So we're going to explore this in terms of how we can measure the condition, what are the types of programs that we use to extend the life cycle, and then how can we optimize that. So pavement management programs help us decide what to do, where to do it, when to do it, and how much it's going to cost. So that's kind of a forward viewpoint of the process, right? What are we going to do, where, and when? And then, based on that, how much is it going to cost? One of the advantages of pavement management programs is that through the software applications, we can actually do the reverse. So we can actually decide how much we want to spend, and then the programs will tell us what, where, and when we should spend that. Okay, so that's part of the power of this, is being able to run different scenarios using the software programs. The pavement condition index describes the level of service over time. On this graph, we see just a simple line which represents pavement condition over time. And you see in the upper left of the graph, the pavement, when it's first put down, is at a very high level of service. And then over time, it deteriorates, and then there's kind of a break point where it breaks off and it really declines. And so that we're going to talk about that, and that break point is very important to us. But being able to measure that pavement condition over time is the fundamental idea in a pavement management program. And measuring pavement condition is not new. It's been done for a long time. In fact, there's an ASTM standard, and in times past, and maybe even today in some communities, there are engineering techs who know how to do these surveys, and they go out and they look at a representative plot or a patch of the roadway, and they fill out the form. And you can imagine how much time that would take for a community with 30, 50, 100 miles of roadway. So this is kind of the old style. It was pretty subjective, and it takes a lot of time, and it's only incremental. It's only done over certain representative areas. Today's technology uses lasers and GPS and other video technology to get a continuous record of the surface condition. And there are deflectometers which can measure how the asphalt responds to an impact that will give you an idea of the condition of the base, the sub-base. So we can identify the surface condition and the subsurface condition. In most instances, we talk about the surface or overall, and overall is surface and subsurface. So that's important to recognize when you're looking at a pavement condition index map. Is this map surface only, or is it overall, which includes the subsurface? The data acquired there is then processed, and each block in the survey is then assigned a pavement condition. And you see there on the right the qualitative and rank from 0 to 100, and then qualitatively from very poor to excellent. And we always use these same colors, and these colors carry through, so you'll see them on maps and other displays. So what does a pavement condition index look like in terms of practical matters? Well, this is a very good, maybe a PCI of 95. A good, that might be represented by about a 70. And then a fair, and you can see in the fair now your centerline crack has really developed, and then you get some rutting on the sides where the traffic is going. And then into your poor, which is a PCI of 45, and then very poor, which is down below that 45. So in most instances, that fair is about the cutoff for where we want to start looking at perhaps resurfacing. We don't want to let it get into the very poor condition, right? Because that's allowing moisture into the base, which is creating a problem that even resurfacing won't address. So this is an example of a pavement condition index for a town, for a village. It's Elk Grove Village. And you can see the different streets are shown in color. And then the scale is shown. And then there's a pie chart which shows the percentage of the roadway, which is excellent, good, fair, and so on. Notice also the average surface condition is 75.8. And usually in these, we will look at that average number and how that average number varies over time as we run through the various future scenarios. So this is a snapshot in time. This is current conditions, and it is just the surface condition. So how much does all that cost? Well, it depends. And there's quite a range in terms of cost, dollars per mile, $200 to $1,200. That's quite a variation. So what are the variables? Well, one of the most important variables is the miles of the survey. There's a very high mobilization charge. So if you only have 40 or 50 miles, your cost per mile is going to be relatively high, probably near the middle of this range. If you've got the 700-800 miles to up to 1,000, you can expect to have a much lower cost. Then it's a matter of what technology is being used. There's actually smartphone technology today where you can put a smartphone in your dashboard and have a continuous record. And they have algorithms that will interpret the cracking in the roadway. The type of data that's collected, if it's surface only, or if you're also going to include the subsurface information, and whether or not you're going to include some of your other infrastructure, right? Because there's cameras, you can have those cameras pointed to your right-of-way, and you can pick up trees or signs or other things, and they have algorithms, artificial intelligent algorithms that can identify these signs. And then, of course, the processing and data analysis and reporting. And many times you'll hire a contractor based on a bid and then use that data either in-house or with your engineering firm to interpret that and help you in developing your 5- and 10-year capital improvement programs. One thing that can be done with that first snapshot, if you have the date in which the surface was last resurfaced, you can plot the age versus the PCI for that first condition survey. And you'll see that community-wide deterioration curve. Now, it's kind of subjective at this point. It's broad throughout the whole community, and so that's why the points are kind of all around, but it will give you a good idea on average how things are deteriorating. The best case is when you've gone and done several surveys and you have the results on a block of roadway, and you can plot them over time, typically 3 to 5 year increments in these surveys. So you can imagine if you could see a new pavement surface and how that deteriorated over time, that would be very beneficial in terms of predicting when maintenance or resurfacing would be needed. The timely maintenance helps extend the useful life of our pavement. As I mentioned, that normal degradation curve, resurfacing and then going back to the degradation with no pavement maintenance is shown by that curve. And what we would hope to accomplish is to intervene in that deterioration before we reach that break point and keep our pavement condition up and extend the overall life cycle. So how would we do that? Well, we would do that through preventative maintenance programs, such as asphalt rejuvenators or microsurfacing. Those things would be preventative maintenance in nature, and they would be done when the PCI is up pretty high. If the PCI was allowed to drop down, we would go into a rehabilitation phase where resurfacing or hot mix in place would be applicable. And Chris will be talking about these different maintenance options in more detail in the coming presentation, but just to give you an idea. And then lastly, if we've allowed the pavement to deteriorate, we've got subsurface that needs to be reconstructed, we're talking about a significant amount of money. So that's the pavement maintenance options that we're looking at. Let's take a look at a minute what that does to a deterioration curve. This is a normal deterioration curve showing a number of years and the PCI rank, and it's kind of scrunched together here, so it's a little bit steeper, but you see that less slope at the beginning and then it breaks off. If we would apply certain pavement maintenance activities like resurfacing or doing a heavy patching along with the resurfacing, okay? So we're going in and we're doing heavy patching before we resurface. That's actually going to move that deterioration curve a little bit to the right, and it's going to flatten it a little bit because that heavy patching is going to keep it in the years out from deteriorating so much. The second curve here is shown with the asphalt rejuvenator. So now if we add asphalt rejuvenator, in those early years, it stays better longer. And so the curve gets moved out a little bit, and the top part of it is staying a little bit higher. And then the last part is the crack seal. And of course, the crack sealing helps prevent getting that moisture getting down into the pavement. And so applying these pavement maintenance activities throughout the life cycle, you create a new deterioration curve, and that deterioration curve represents an extension of the life cycle. So if we take that idea and apply it to a life cycle of pavement, it might look something like this, where the original pavement would deteriorate over time, and then we would have a resurfacing, and so on. And you see that as we go through that cycle, each time the subbase is deteriorated a little bit more. So the curve gets a little bit deeper. It's a little bit harder. That's why eventually we have to reconstruct. And that the cycles in which we have to come back and resurface are closer together. They're fewer in years, so the pavement surface itself doesn't stay up in the high level of service for a long time. And eventually we have to reconstruct. So if we look at this with the pavement maintenance in mind, we see the original pavement along with the resurfacing there. But now we're looking at a situation where our new deterioration curve is staying higher, up in the higher level of service longer, and it's not going as deep. And so, yes, eventually we'll have to reconstruct, but through the life cycle of that pavement, it's had a higher level of service for longer. And the base has not deteriorated as much over time. And so that's the argument for pavement maintenance. And from this example, we're saving about 20 to 25% over the life cycle of that pavement. So we've talked about measuring the pavement deterioration. We've talked about ways to extend the life cycle. Let's add costs now. And what we see is that cost of maintenance increases as the pavement gets older, right? And there's a break point there, and that break point is when you have to resurface. And obviously there's another break point where you have to reconstruct. And when we look at the cost of these different maintenance activities over time and how they relate to the PCI, we see this change in the investment that's needed. So in the case where we're doing preventative maintenance, that asphalt rejuvenator, crack sealing, and microsurfacing, we're talking about $1 to $7 per square yard up in that high level of service. We get into the rehabilitation, we're talking about primarily resurfacing at much higher costs, and then of course the reconstruction or full depth reclamation, something like that, is even higher still. And so it's this difference and the increase in cost as PCI goes down, as the level of service is allowed to deteriorate, that is the rationale, is the economics behind doing the pavement maintenance. In the pavement management programs, it's important to first understand what your target is. And so here is an example of a community that developed what they wanted their pavement to look like. Now, their actual was not anywhere near this, and it was going to take several years to accomplish this, but this is where their end goal was, so that they had enough excellent and very good pavement to apply some of the pavement maintenance strategies, and not too many that were in the very poor or poor condition that they were needing to be reconstructed. But realizing that sometimes streets do get to that point where you need to reconstruct. So with this ideal distribution, they were able to then establish what their goal was, and then to do different permutations through the software to see how they could get to that goal. And some of those permutations are exemplified by this decision tree, where the user, you, the community, decides at what level you would do what strategy. And Chris will talk about this a little bit more, but for instance, if we were PCI of less than 85, we might look at a pavement maintenance activity. And if it was cracking was greater than 10, we might actually do that, including crack sealing. But if it was less than 10, we wouldn't do anything for that particular year. And so the algorithms in the software are going through these decision trees for every block, for every year, as you, the user, define the decision points, okay? And so then as a result, you get what the condition will be in the future. And then you can identify various goals and see how much it will cost to reach that goal. And that's what's shown here. So we have the pavement rank, that's the overall pavement rank for this community, versus the average annual street maintenance for a 5-year interval and a 10-year interval. So in this particular case, the community started with a current rank of 78, and they needed to spend about $7.5 million to maintain that rank of 78. They were currently spending 1.2, and that was down here. And so in 5 years, their rank was going to change from 78 to 70. You see that? So with a $1.2 million investment per year, they were going to be losing ground. And in order to kind of tread water where they are, stay where they are, they needed about 7.5. And so this is the kind of information that city councils and boards need to understand, that if they're not going to provide the funding, that the overall condition of the roadways is going to go down. In the end, it's all about putting that CIP program together, right? It's that 5 years program, and where are the streets that we're going to be resurfacing or maintaining over the next 5 and or 10 years. This is an example of one of the communities that we've worked with and their 5-year CIP for roads. And what you don't see here is that this is a result of both the software saying what was needed to be done and the interpretation of the engineer and the client in determining what program they wanted to implement, okay? So it's a combination. We don't just take what the computer says. We also look at that, particularly in terms of grouping streets together, because we know that when we have a number of streets that are located close together, we'll get a better unit cost. And so that's part of the strategy to stretch our roadway dollars. So in summary, the pavement condition allows us to be able to see how pavement deteriorates over time. We know that we can maintain, we can do some maintenance activities and extend that life cycle, and that we can do that in a timely basis that will actually save us money in the long run, optimizing and stretching our dollars that we're spending. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any recommendations for programs that are, easy to use and
So are you referring to software programs or? Yeah. So the question is, do we have any recommendations for software programs? And the answer is no. We have some that we are more familiar with than others, but over the last 5 years, there's been an upsurge in the number of vendors that are in the market. And so our recommendation is that you go through a proposal process, shortlisting, maybe doing a statement of qualification, then shortlisting 3 and getting their proposals. One thing to be careful about is the QA/QC. We have seen some communities in this area that have experienced less than high quality data. And the reason they know that is because they have a street that had a higher pavement condition index 3 years after it was done the first time. Now that was an anomaly, but that was enough for them to raise an eyebrow and to dig into the quality control behind that. And so the take home from that is that there is an important role in quality control in the implementation. But it's really through the RFQ, RFP process that you'll find what's the best program suited for your community. And it's a great learning experience to go through that as well. Yes, sir.
Like 2 or 3 slides back, you showed the example of like community. Yeah, this one here. How are you factoring in time to this calculation? Because all the graphs you showed is time is relative or qualitative measure.
Yes.
Assuming for this calculation, you need time to be a quantitative or measured part of this equation. How are you guys coming up with that?
So this is one point in time. It's 5 years out, right? So we were showing a number of the, I'm sorry. The question was, so the axis on here is money instead of time. Most of the graphs we were showing was time, and this one shows the dollar spent. So most of the graphs were showing how we deteriorate over time. What we've done here is taken one vertical slice, that's at one time, 5 years past the present, and then we've looked at the detail in terms of the cost. And so that's why we have two curves. We've done that at 2 points, at 5 years and at 10 years. And this is how it changes.
So if you're taking a 5-year window for this, are you taking two fixed points to say this road went from 78 to 70, or how are you?
Yes, yes. So it's from current to 5 years out. And look at that. How much did we spend to get here? And what's the overall PCI? And then 10 years. Very powerful. You can do all kinds of different permutations, and that decision tree can be modified. And Chris is going to talk a little bit more about how that works in terms of how it relates back to the preventative maintenance program. One more?
So what program was used for these graphs?
This particular program, we use Paver Pro, but we also use Paver, kind of the bare bones. I know there are several other interfaces that are really kind of user preference. So the data is pretty standardized now, but how it's displayed and the decision trees and all that stuff is software dependent. So there's a lot of different software there. Some are very engineering specific, some are more intuitive. And that's why I say it really depends, and why going through that selection process is really valuable, because you get to see, you know, what do the different screens look like? What do I have to do this? How many clicks do I have to do, and so on. So it's very valuable to go through that process. Yeah. Adam?
Do you convert data from Pacer to PCI or from PCI to Pacer?
I'm sorry, Adam, say it from PCI to
Convert data
Paver,
from Pacer management?
Pacer management? Yes,
PCI.
I believe you can. Chris, can you help me here? So Adam was asking about, can you convert the PCI to Paver?
Pacer to PCI. So
Paver to PCI.
Adam, you said Pacer, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So it would be probably a little bit difficult just because the Pacer is typically like driving like a windshield survey. You're not getting that detailed information that you're typically getting in the PCI. But you still get that 0 to 9 rating in the Pacer that you don't, and you could probably kind of calculate that into a PCI, but it's you're getting a lot more data with doing the PCI ranking.
Yeah, thank you, Adam, for that question. That kind of reminds me, the smartphone technology, the leader in that is a company called Robotics, and we've used them on a couple of surveys, and they don't really have a software that processes the data, but the data is relatively inexpensive. It's about $200 a mile, and they have various condition. And you know, we have our spreadsheet set up where we can essentially do those 5-year programs using canned deterioration curves. Anything else? Jeffrey.
Tim, my question is more for the group. How many communities here have a pavement management program that they use?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, 5 years ago, I don't think you would have seen that, right? So, good job. Thank you, everyone.